Okay, dads, welcome to Dad Space, a place for dads, a podcast for dads, by dads. And you have two dads today. I'm a dad. My guest is a dad. So a perfect spot for two dads to hang out. This dad is out on his porch having coffee. I'm in my basement, huddled in trying to stay warm in Canada here, having my coffee. So we're both sharing coffee, sharing dad stories. Welcome to the podcast. Andy Izard is here, and I'm so excited to have Andy here on the show. Welcome to Dad Space. Nice to have you here.
Thanks, Dave. I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this all week, and you were just such a kind personality already. I have enjoyed our time, and I'm so excited to do this episode with you. So thank you for having me on.
So if you're watching the video of this, you will enjoy as much as I am being out on the porch with Andy as he sips his coffee. It looks like heaven, like very relaxing and beautiful and tranquil. So nice. Andy, tell everybody where you are in this great big world of ours.
Yes, I'm not in Canada. I'm in Arizona. So I'm in the States. And Arizona is pretty diverse. So I grew up in the desert, kind of in the central area around Phoenix, and finally moved up to the mountains this last year. So now I've actually got pine trees and cool weather and snow sometimes. And it's kind of my paradise. So I'm about as happy as I could possibly be up here.
There you go. So my first trip to Phoenix, I worked for they're not a sponsor, so we'll do it this way. I worked for a large pet company who have pet stores in the US and Canada. They think they're smart. Let's put it that way. And they have their head office in Phoenix. So I flew from Canada to Phoenix, Arizona in August. Pause for the laugh.
For those who don't know, yeah.
For the first time ever, I'd never been to Phoenix in my entire life. I'd never been south of New York City. How's that? Ever.
It's different.
Okay, so I left an air-conditioned car on an air-conditioned bus to an air-conditioned airport in Toronto, jumped on an air-conditioned plane to an air-conditioned airport, direct flight straight to Phoenix. And when I walked through those doors, out of the airport for the very first time, I swear there was like 10 or 15 people local sitting at the door just waiting for me to walk through, because I almost melted in that second when those doors opened. I'm like, oh no, this isn't real. This is not real. And it's real, right?
It's real. People describe it like an oven. And I mean, honest to God, when you open your oven after baking pizza or pastries or whatever it is, and you get that in the face of heat, that is exactly what it feels like. I've worked outside for a few summers, and it never quite goes away, and you never quite get used to it. It's hot.
And when we got there, they're like, make sure you don't leave any of your deodorant in the car. And I'm like, what? Don't leave
Goners.
Deodorant. They're like, it's liquid. I'm like, okay. And I met my first cactus for the first time there. That was a nice, very pointed meeting. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah. And I could see the sidewalks go around the cactus. And I'm like, oh, this is crazy. So anyways.
It's different, man. I'm so curious about where you live, especially being so close to the falls. I'm like, I have no reference for it. I was born and raised in Arizona, so I'm like, what I know is desert with a little bit of forest. But I'm like, this is the coldest I've ever felt, is like 4 degrees. That's the coldest, and I mean that was by a long shot. I grew up never feeling anything less than 30, and I'm like, I don't know what you experience, but it cannot be what I have experienced.
Okay, so this is Dad Space. We're here to talk about the dad stories. And one thing I really liked when we talked before coming on was you shared a story about a podcast, Direct Advice for Dads podcast. And you were listening to this podcast at a time when you needed it. And you didn't even realize, I guess, at that moment, how much you needed this episode and this show. And listening to a story that helped you and your family at that moment. And I love podcasts, because we're on one. And but I love the fact that we can be a part of somebody's life as a podcaster, as a guest. And somebody's going to be listening to our episode, Andy, and maybe having the same moment that you had. Think about that for a second. That's mind blown right there. Somebody's listening to our show today, you and I, and they might be having something similar they're living through. But you were listening to the show with
Wow.
direct advice for dads. And can you tell me a little bit about maybe the podcast and how you found it and maybe
Yeah.
the episode that kind of spoke to you?
Yeah. Well, I think I learned that we were going to be having a kid, and I pretty quickly concluded that I knew not enough about what kids are or need to feel comfortable. So I think I pretty much just got on Apple and searched like dad podcasts, and it was one of those that came up, and I'm like, good enough. Let's start listening to something. And I think I listened to a few of them at the time, but that one especially is a couple of Australian dads, and they're just like two different personalities. Like one a little bit more like charismatic, kind of a little more out there and snappy, and the other a little more soft spoken like me, and a little more like tender hearted, I think. And just hearing, I honestly, there were a couple episodes that stood out, but like in general during that time, just hearing that other dads were feeling what I was feeling, like learning the things that I was trying to Google like an hour before, and basically just going through the same sort of waves that I was experiencing made me feel so normal. And in a way that I don't know, I feel like no one really can prepare you for being a parent. I'm speaking as a dad, but I mean I can't imagine as a mom, but like even as a dad, like I it's all new. And even when you think you're ready, like surprise, you were close, but you were not prepared. Like, but
Right.
everyone goes through something similar to that. So like that process just really was comforting to me. But I just a little bit of our, do you mind if I tell a little bit of my
Oh,
story on
yeah.
this one?
Yeah, yeah. No, please.
So my wife got preeclampsia. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's basically, I'm fine. If there's any medical professionals listening, like I'm going to be wrong, so bear with me.
Yeah.
But basically, the body is mad at mom and baby. Like, so the body is basically starting to like reject the baby. And this is the kind of stuff where, you know, without modern medicine, like mom and baby die. So with modern medicine, there's so much more room, and it's not a death sentence anymore. It's like a manageability thing. So Kayla got that. About 7 weeks before the due date. So, and that was that was a scary week. So during that process, her blood pressure shoots up. And the blood pressure stays up. And if it stays up too much, too long, she starts having seizures. If too many seizures happen, she dies, baby dies. Like that's kind of the fearful progression if things go really south. But again, we're really fortunate to be living, you know, in a first world country where it's like we have medical care and it's management. So during that week, she went into the hospital. Oh, and I should say, my kid is 2.5. So this was right at like the peak of COVID
Oh,
in
wow.
America. So it was July of 2020, right at the end of July when this was happening. So they said, and they basically told me like, Andy, you can be with her, but you can't leave. So once you check in, you can stay, but you can't come and go. You can't come and go. No one else can come in. So we basically buckled up, and like I just started a brand new job too. It was fantastic. It was like 10 days before. I'm like, my wife is in the hospital and I can't come in. They were so understanding, so gracious. They're like, go do your thing. We're fine. Go do it. So we checked into the hospital. Her blood pressure was up like crazy. She didn't have any seizures, fortunately, but like her face was completely swollen. Like she started getting, I think it was fuzzy vision or something messing with the vision. They're like, you know what? We got to get the baby out. Just like it's time to like induce labor. And then they tried that for like an hour, and they're like, it's time for an emergency C-section. So
Mm.
from there, Sammy got out, and he was safe, and Kayla's safe. But he was in the classic NICU box, right?
Yeah.
So he couldn't breathe quite on his own. He definitely couldn't eat on his own. He couldn't keep his body temperature. So he's sitting in the box with all the hoses and the IVs and the monitors, and I was having my like emotional distress. And another thing with COVID, during the C-section, Kayla got a fever spike. So they said, I'm so sorry, mom, you have a fever. We can't let you see the baby for 24 hours. So Kayla was sitting in the other room after just having had a C-section, and she can't
Wow.
hold our baby.
Wow.
So So yeah, man, I was in there with him in the NICU for quite a lot of that time, the late nights, and just trying to like be someone that he can recognize enough. So kind of bouncing back and forth between the two, losing my mind. But through that process, I could still have my earbuds in, right? So I was listening to the Direct Advice for Dads podcast pretty much just nonstop.
This is the Direct Advice for Dads podcast, or the Dad Pod. Yes, hello and welcome to the Direct Advice for Dads podcast, the podcast by dads for dads, all dads. My name's Ross Edwards. I've got a boy aged 5 and a girl aged 2.
And my name is Dan Vandermeer. I have a girl who is 12, a girl who is 10, and a boy who is 7. Ross.
Yeah, man, like having community, having people who like have done this or something similar before made all the difference in the world for me.
So we talked about, reaching out to them and letting them know your story. We're actually doing that kind of in an audio format. So to the two gentlemen that do this podcast, what would you like to say to them? Because I'm sure they're going to hear your words and hear us talking about their amazing show. Any words of thanks that you'd like to share to them for being there in that moment for you guys?
More than I can do. I guess like I just say that they like if you are listening, like dude, I mean first of all, like thank you, because that really it was there for me at a point where I could not have other people in the room to help. And I just say like you have no idea the impact that is being made by your sharing your experience and guests and just sharing the authentic that we all go through. Like I never thought about honestly talking to them by voice, but like that, yeah. And I still haven't messaged them. So it's been 3 years and they haven't heard a darn thing about the way they've been impacting my life. But like as dads, like that completely shifted my mentality and the way I was able to be there for my son, my wife, and for myself too. Like we really have no idea what kind of ripples come from simple actions and obviously more complex actions like putting on a podcast and airing it internationally. So cheers to both of them.
Today we are joined by a fellow dad who went through the unique and frankly emotional roller coaster ride of a preemie birth. Andrew Stewart, your mate and his lovely wife, Emma's oldest son, was born 15 years ago at just 29 weeks. And he joins us today to share his thoughts and feelings about the experience and how it all worked out for him and his family. Andrew, hello.
Hi, Ross. How are you?
And for two gentlemen in Australia to find out that they impacted your family in Arizona. Like, again, do you think they're planning on talking to somebody in Arizona? Probably not. But I can't wait for them to hear your comments. I can't. I seriously, as a podcaster, I'd be like, what? Who?
That would make me so happy, man. Like they were pretty new. If I remember right, it was like the first, it's definitely like under 50 episodes. Like they were kind of babies. So yeah, I bet they had no clue that across the world, some dad was sitting in a NICU recliner, not being able to sleep, holding his preemie. Like we have no idea, but it changed my life and it has changed the way that I approach conversations with other dads. It's just going first, right? Like to be the first one to like put yourself out there and like extend that invitation. Right. It is life changing to be on the receiving end of that and eventually to be on the extending side of that. But like we are so much more connected than we think we are. And it still surprises me. I forgot about it until we started talking about their podcast. But man.
Very well, mate. Good to have you on the podcast. Now, for most of us dads, the birthing experience is mostly a memorable experience for all the right reasons. We're about to find out what happens when things don't quite go to plan. So, Andrew, tell us about that fateful day that you found out your baby was coming something like 11 weeks early.
So now let's flip this around, Andy. And I kind of alluded to this at the beginning. Now you're on a show.
Yeah, I'm on a show.
Talking about your story. You're talking about your story, and there might be somebody today sitting in NICU, holding a baby, listening to you on Dad Space. And they're like, I can't believe there's someone else in the world that knows exactly what it feels like to be sitting here in the NICU holding this new little fragile little life. And there's someone else there in Arizona that knows exactly what I feel right now. What are you going to say to them? I'm getting out of the way. What do you say to them as they have their earbuds in? They're going through all the emotions. They're going through all the stuff. They feel totally not prepared for this, Andy.
No.
What do you say to them? Talk to them right now.
I mean, honestly, like if someone else is in one of those recliners, like hang in there and just know that like everything that you are feeling is completely normal. And it just, even after spending some time out of it, like 2.5 years, I talked to other people with kids in the NICU. I talked to NICU nurses. Like the range of emotions are so freaking extreme and severe, and they're all normal and they're all okay. Like in that process, I mean, I felt huge fear when I felt fear that Kayla, my wife, was gonna die. I felt fear that Sammy was gonna die. When they didn't come to get me when they should have, I'm like, they left me waiting for like 15 minutes longer than I was expecting. No problem on their end, but in my brain, that 15 minutes is like, oh God, here it comes, yeah. Right? And then fearing for Sammy, my son's health when he was in his little box, all normal. Feeling guilty for fearing for him when you look next door and see a baby that's half his size on twice as many tubes. Feeling guilty when other parents come in, when other parents don't come in. Like, you're not the only one in the NICU. And all of that is okay. But it's just a series of swift kicks to the gut. And it's all normal and it's all okay and it's all fine to just scrape by, make it through one way or another, imperfect fights along the way, like depression, anxiety, like all of the things in this process are normal and are fine. When we got home, Kayla was released. Again, COVID, right? So they had to get her out and free up the bed while Sammy stayed in the NICU. So we were on a really limited visitation schedule. So we had to go home. And basically one of us could do one visit per day. When you're done, you got to stop.
So Andy, 1 second. You left the hospital without your son?
We had to leave him there.
What does it feel like to,
because
for me, all my kids, I came home with me, right? That was part of the thing.
It's part of the
thing. You go in as a couple, you leave as parents, and you walk out together holding your child. You go out to the car and you do that first trip home. What is it like to leave the hospital as a couple without your son?
Horrible, man. Oh my God. It was the absolute worst. It was the worst. Even though we knew, again, that he was being cared for and watched out gently and like loved as much as the NICU nurses truly did love the babies there, right? But like it was horrible. I can't even express that feeling of like, and again, in hindsight, he was a lot more stable than I thought he was. Like his vitals were pretty stable. But I of course thought like he's gonna die, right? Like what if he dies while we're eating a cheeseburger at the house? Like it was just horrible. But they told my wife like, hey, you're improving and you're gonna have to go home now. And I think that is probably the closest she ever had to an anxiety attack. I mean, like her blood pressure spiked up again and she had that like visceral response that every mother has when it's like you have a 1 day, or at that point, like maybe 5-day-old premature infant baby. It's like, you're going to have to go home. And she couldn't stand for more than like 20 minutes at a time. It turns out she did have some complications from the C-section. I don't think they got all of what they needed to clear out. So she couldn't quite even make it to visit him. And like, even if she could sit in the chair for 30 minutes, it's like, that's it. If you have to go, you have to go. You can't sleep there. You can't stay there. You can't go out and come back. Like, it's COVID law. We're locked down. So that was brutal for her, brutal for me, brutal for everyone. But like, we were so fortunate to have family in the area that would bring stuff to the like lobby of the hospital and like leave it inside the doors. And I looked at the security guard and he's like, you can go pick it up, you just can't go out. So I'm like, cool. So we had so much support in that process that, again, feeling even guilty for feeling sad, for feeling alone when you're not alone, but you feel horribly alone. It is just, it was a nightmare. And again, all of it was normal. And so many people experience that who get their kid, and their kid is healthy and happy and safe. And then there are others who don't. And it's just all of, man, we are so similar as people. Like when we go through hard stuff like that, we can handle it different ways, but man, it sucks.
So tell me, what was Andy like going in before being a dad into the hospital? And then when you're finally able to take your son home, how was Andy different after the experience? Now you have this new life in your home. What changed about you as a dad? Because you actually got the dad title.
I got the
right?
card,
so now, right. So now what's different between the two Andys? Explain that to me.
I haven't thought about that, but that is a good question. I think the biggest change that really happened then was my ability to hold it together when it was truly a necessity. I have anxiety, depression, like I'm not the best hold it together that you're gonna meet, especially as far as guys go. Some are like stoic and just like you can't shake them. I am not that dad. So it was, I think, at least for me as a guy, I think that guys are in a unique position compared to a lot of women, where it seems like the kind of, I'm just going to say like the knee-jerk response when a woman is in a tough situation is like, no one's coming, I will handle it. And women don't snap under pressure when it really comes down to it. Now, for my experience, and again, maybe this is different for other guys, but like my experience is like when things get really, really hard, there's a certain point where you can tap out and help will be there to support you. So it's like, I need a break. Throw your hands up, walk away, and inevitably something comes to alleviate whatever responsibility you left on the table, right? And that didn't work in the NICU. So that was my first like real trial by fire experience of like, no one's coming. Like if you leave, then he's alone. And if you fall apart, then your wife is alone. And there's just nothing, there's no help that is going to make it inside these walls. So you've got to hold it together. And I held it together, except for one. No, I think we held it together. Yeah, I think I held it together. And then when Kayla and I got home without Sammy, I got her into the house and I walked out to my August Arizona heat summer day, and I laid down on the sidewalk in the front yard and just had silence. And for the first time, like let myself kind of fall apart, which it wasn't much fall apart, but it was something. But yeah, man, I think that was the first time where I'm like, okay, when it hits the fan, like you can hold it together enough. And I think I've held it together enough. I've fallen apart plenty, but yeah, that was an experience.
And that's the one thing I want to normalize, Andy, that we can talk about stuff like this as dads, because that was the idea for creating the podcast. Was I just didn't find an outlet for men to get on and just talk about, hey, this is what I went through. This is how I did really well, or I didn't handle it very well. And this is what I learned. And this is what I want to tell you as a listener. This is what real life is like. And you're going to be fine. But just realize that you're not going to make the best choices, or somebody's going to throw a curveball at you and you're not going to be ready for it. And just do your best with what you have and get people around you to either a podcast you listen to while you're listening in the NICU, or people bringing you food and supporting you in the waiting room. Yeah. Find those people in that community around you that have you when you feel like your job is to have everyone else, and you're kind of, like you said, bouncing back and forth between your son and your wife, your son and your wife, your son and your wife. And it's in that moment, I'm like, but who's there for Andy, right? Who's there for you, right?
Phone calls. I was so fortunate to have people who were there through the phone. Like, I shout out to Ian if you ever hear this, and like our family, but man, you need people. You need people. Otherwise, it's a horrible feeling to feel like truly alone. And I was not truly alone, but man, we can help each other with like little things. And I have to go back and correct something. I did snap at one point. I think my wife and we had like a 10-minute fight, and I'm pretty sure I cussed at her, and then I felt fucking horrible, and I came back to it later. So I was like, that's what I was thinking about earlier. Something bad happened, and I'm pretty sure I swore at her and apologized like 10 minutes later for losing my cool. So if anyone's also done that, then I forgot that happened.
And that's the reality of things. And you know, it's hard to self-edit in those moments because you have so much on you and coming at you from different directions. But I think that's the beauty of a strong relationship with your wife, is you can be real with each other, and you know that she has you and you have her, and that's amazing.
I was talking to someone. She works with couples who specifically are going through what's the word? Chronic health issues. And about the stress that has on both sides of a relationship. And she said something that thoroughly stuck with me. She said that the conflict in the moment is not what will actually determine the strength or the weakness of the relationship going forward. It's the time after the conflict and how you go back and resolve it. So I definitely hate losing my cool and like having my emotional meltdown, because I mean, it just sucks. Like, you never really want to do that to your family, and like it doesn't feel great for yourself either. But I've thought so many times, it's like, oh, it's the little meltdowns that will make or break the relationship. It's like, studies say no. I mean, I'm sure they have their impact, no doubt about it, but like, it's the recovery, it's the reconnection, the relationship, restoring the hours that keep coming up. But like that is what actually will make or break the strength of the relationship. And that was a huge encouragement to me, and I will not be forgetting that.
Love it. Okay. So Andy, what kind of things are you learning right now? You know, you said your son is about 2.5, roughly years old. What are you learning about being a dad that is kind of catching you by surprise? You're like, oh, I didn't realize I'd be learning this lesson. Is there anything new that's happening for you right now?
Emotional regulation. Kids are remarkable for learning what you think and feel and believe about yourself instead of what you tell them to believe about themselves. Like, that is a devastating lesson, is that the way that I feel about myself is the way that he's probably going to feel about himself. So like, the way that I behave is the way he's probably going to behave. So learning to like how to keep myself regulated, and like, if we talk about like RPM on a car, right, the tachometer, like trying to get back out of the red and get it back to a reasonable working spot. And like, I'm in counseling and trying to like learn those skills. That is hard work, man. That is hard work to feel your feelings and not shut them off like I am so used to doing. That is kicking my ass, and that is surprising me.
Your story before you were married and back in your back story, I guess, there's been times where you've really had some pretty big mountains to climb, right?
I would say so. Yeah. I wasn't a happy kid. I'm trying to think how to say that, because I grew up in a very fortunate place. I grew up in a 2-parent home. Like, mom and dad stayed. I always knew that I was loved. I had all my needs provided for. Like, I had my college paid for, which is, I'm not sure if that's a thing in Canada, but it is in America. Like, I'm trying to remember, so forgive me. But like, I grew up in a really fortunate situation. Internally, I was not doing so well from 6 like six, I could get into it. I don't know how much you want to get into it, but I very much internalized that like I was a bad person. I was the reason our family was experiencing the conflict that they were. And basically, like I developed a lot of self-hatred and self-loathing and depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts and tendencies from a pretty young age that just stuck with me. So yeah, I got much better at shutting down emotions, not very good at processing them, not very good at asking for help or staying regulated. Like self-harm definitely played a big part in my story. So when I got too worked up, I would self-harm, I'd get an adrenaline dump and I'd feel better. And then I could table it. I could put it on the back burner and kind of keep going. And that stuck with me, unfortunately. And basically I just kind of never really figured out how to handle my emotions. And then when I've got a little 2-year-old with his emotions, plus my emotions, plus Kayla's emotions, like it has been some like next level learning where it's like, all right, we've got to address this. And again, it's in my mind, I'm like, I've got to address this so I don't impact Sammy with the stuff that I could be addressing that I'm not. So like that's kind of, there's probably a little bit of trauma in that one too. Like I would love to get to the point where I'm doing it for myself, but at this point I'd say I'm still trying to do the work for him, but whatever reason is good enough for right now.
Well, thank you for sharing that. The other thing, when I look at your email address, when we set up our meeting together, I'm seeing the Raft project. Can you tell me why that's in your email address, Andy? Because I want to know, what is the Raft project?
I appreciate you asking. Yeah, that is the business that my wife and I we started our business working it full time. Basically around the idea that we need other people in our life, that we're not built to do it alone. And if we do it alone, I'm going to just make up a made up number on a percentage, but like you can only hit like 70% of where you're supposed to be, or 50% or 80%, whatever it is. We can't live a full life completely isolated. Just as humans, we aren't built to do it. So the idea of building a raft, like that's kind of our imagery for it. And like that has been the life-changing part for me, is instead of getting one person, my wife, to emotionally support me and to take all of my emotions to her, dump them on her, and expect her to handle it. We tried that and it didn't work. Shocker. So going out and building my quote unquote raft of getting people to support me in little ways. So I have many more people now to support me in like a dad journey, support me in a financial question, support me in a work question, support me in all these little different ways. But I've built enough people into my life that I can like spread out that emotional weight. So now I feel like I actually have a raft that can handle some waves, it can handle some bad weather, it can handle some parts going away, getting replaced, coming in, moving out. Like I have enough of a platform that at this point, I don't feel like I'm ever alone. I have plenty of people that I can go to. And like that has been our underlying premise of this, is that we feel so alone, but we're not. We're all like drowning right next to each other. Like there are so many people so close, but we are all we believe that we're the only ones doing it because everyone else is somehow magically better at us at masking and kind of keeping their internal problems internal until it spills over someplace else. So like our goal is to change the way the world does connections so we can start getting more help and more support because it's there. I mean, okay, you said you did go to Phoenix. How long ago was that?
Oh, this was years ago.
And you found a cactus on your way. You said you got stuck?
No. Well, I went up and I put my hand under one of the needles and it was bigger than my hand and I couldn't. I'm like, holy cow, this is not fake. These are serious size needles, man. These are huge.
They are. Some of those things are mean and nasty and they will jump and stick you. But the reason that I was wondering if you have ever heard of the barrel cactus. No. It probably is not a thing for most people in the world, but it is in Arizona. So in the desert, There's cactus everywhere. Like everything wants to stick you or poke you or bite you.
Sounds like a kid. Yeah.
But it kind of does. It's parenting. Yeah. But these cactus, barrel cactus, there's moisture inside of them. So they are completely pointy, sharp. Like if you put your hand on it, it'll stick you and it'll stick you really good. But if you know how to get it, if you know how to like get inside of it and get the moisture, it can keep you alive in the desert summer, right? So you look out and it's a barren landscape. Everything is pointy, prickly, and scary. And you think you're going to die of thirst or heat exhaustion, and you very well might. But in that desert, a kind of scary landscape, there are little pockets of moisture if you know how to look for them. And they're everywhere. And I feel like that is my experience with people when I am like needing connection. It's so daunting because you're like, no one understands, no one could get it because I'm somehow broken and just messed up and it's okay. It's all right. I'm fine alone, right? But if you know how to get it, and if you can extend that invitation, people have life-giving connection. Just if it's the experience, if it's the feeling, if it's like, oh, I was in the NICU too, or like, oh my God, my kid went through some serious health issue, or my dad went through a health issue, or I did. I felt that before. It's that connection, that bonding of like, you are not alone, and I can sit here with you and like hold a little bit of your weight today. Like that is the experience that has absolutely changed the way that I like go about the world, from feeling alone to feeling like there are people nearby. I could walk down my street right now, and if I was really in trouble with a certain air, I'd be like, I think I could get some support. I could go to the coffee shop and get some support. I could go to a bar and talk to someone else there and get some support. Like people go through these same things, but we just don't know how. We don't know how to do it. We don't know how to ask. We don't know how to give. It kind of sucks how close we all are, but for some reason we still just haven't been able to bridge that gap.
And the one thing I love about the name of the Raft project is a raft is great for keeping you out of the water and keeping you alive. But the point of a raft is not to sit in the middle of the ocean or a lake and just sit there. You want to go somewhere. You got to get to safety, right? And you don't just want to hang out in the middle of the ocean. What's the point of that? Right. So you have a destination in mind on this raft as well. Beyond survival, you want to get somewhere. So where is the Raft project taking people from, and where are we going to as being part of the Raft project?
That's a good question. So we basically have kind of two different wings just for ourselves. We have what Michaela and I internally call like our movement side of it, which is basically trying to change the way the world does connection, right? So we're speaking events, like podcasts like this, trying to help people like share our experience and see that it's not as scary as we have it cracked up to be, and there are some easier ways to do it. And then we've got our second side, like our meetings, which is basically our community, where it's for people who basically feel like they need more community than they have right now. If they're just looking for a place to start where it's like, yeah, great idea, I have no one to call. So it's like, okay, cool, come join our community and then build your own raft. So our goal is to eventually become obsolete because people are doing all this without us. But in the moment, if you aren't able to do it yourself, then we have some place that you can already just come get support and give support and go from there. Okay. So that's kind of a little bit about our organization, but our goal is to help people understand that we are so much closer, connection is closer than we think.
So Andy, how do people find the Raft project? Where do we go?
So we are on most of the social places. So we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. Everything is at the Raft Project. So, the little squiggly A, the Raft Project. But you can find us there to see what we're doing with our community. But we also did I tell you that we wrote a book? I don't remember if I told you that we wrote a book or not.
I have a podcast called Living the Next Chapter for authors. So
no,
you're coming to that podcast too, by the way. So but tell me about the book. Tell me about the book.
Well, it's releasing in 3 days. So I know. I don't know how we didn't talk about this. I'm not very salesy, I guess. But we have spent the last few months like putting that together, and it's a real live full size book. It's called Good and You, and it's basically all how to get real connection instead of faking it. So I think we try and be there for other people by putting on a nice smiley face and like, but it just, if we're not okay, like we'll never get the support that we need, or we'll never let other people know it's okay to not be okay unless we're willing to like slowly let those walls down. But if we always hold it together for ourselves and we're surprised that our friends don't open up about themselves, it's like, yeah, we have to be willing to start being more genuine and more authentic. Otherwise, we're just going to be stuck in this place of faking it. So yeah, you can find us at least in 3 days. I'm not sure when exactly this is going to air, but by April 4th, you can find us on Amazon or probably wherever books are sold.
Okay, so please put me down for a future guest spot on my Living the Next Chapter podcast. That podcast has 180 episodes in 15
Wow.
months. So I've got authors from
You're
around
busy.
the world. Yeah. And that's one of the 7 that I do, but that would be I'd love to have you on for that.
I
And
love
talk
it.
about that book as well. So keep me in mind for that. I love that. Andy, before we go, one more shout out for the direct advice for dads, because I'm sure they're going to listen to this episode. Any words of thanks to them for that podcast?
As simple as it sounds, like, thank you for helping me know that I am not alone.
The fact that we're doing a podcast about being a dad suggests to me that there's a lot of people out there, obviously new and expecting dads who are hungry for information, which is a really great thing.
Yeah.
It only makes us all better dads at the end of the day, which I think is a fantastic thing. So,
Yeah, no, definitely.
mate, that was unreal. Really appreciate you sharing your experience. It's really helpful advice, I think, for anyone who's going to go through a similar situation. So, mate, you're a champion.
Because that was by far like the hardest point of my life that I've ever been in. And yeah, I truly, truly knew that I was not the only one to go through it, not the only one to feel what I was feeling. And across the globe, there are people who have been in exactly the same spot. So like, thank you for all your hard work, even when it seems like you never really know if anyone's listening on the other end or caring or being impacted like I was, and my family has benefited from it. So thank you.
So Andy, when you listen to the playback of this episode in the future, I want you to listen to what you just said to that podcast and then take those same words and receive it back to yourself for being on this podcast.
That's a dirty trick, Dave.
From a listener.
That's so smart.
From a listener who's listening to your words saying, Andy, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for showing me that I can do what I can do, and for being that example to me. Because you just did what someone did for you. You've now taken that gift and paid it forward to the next person by being a part of this episode. So good on you for doing that.
I love you. I love you for that, man. Like, really, you have been such a kind, like, tender person for me, even in just like the couple of talks that we've had in preparation for this. And like, you have been there and seen me and supported me. And it is tricky to get that with men, especially when you get like machismo involved.
Right.
But like,
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to you. This has been something that I've been really excited about, and I feel you. I feel your care for me. I feel your care for your listeners, and I see that it's so clear to me the purpose and like the reason that you are putting this out into the world and doing all of the work, the very real work that is involved in putting together 7 podcasts and running at a pace like that. Like, thank you for being there for me, and thank you for putting this out in the world. I think we need it, and I think it's important.
Awesome. Andy, Izard, everyone please go check out the Raft Project.com, and all the information will be in the show notes to meet with Andy. The book, Good in You, coming out in a few days. Like, I'm learning so much. Just the more I talk to you, Andy, I'm going to find out like 20 more new things about you. Thank you for making time to be on the podcast, Andy. Thank you for sharing the beautiful scenery behind you, but thank you for sharing a beautiful story and a beautiful life. And to know that all the mountains you've climbed to get to today, to be an example to your wife and to your son. I'm just so grateful that you're here with us and that we have the chance to have this conversation, and your family has you, because there's great days ahead for you and your family. Thank you for being part of the podcast.
I love you, man. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Dad Space today. Go check us out on all of our social media, YouTube, all that great stuff. You can find us as Dad Space Podcast. Real simple. Dad Space Podcast, whether you're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even YouTube. Email us, dadspacepodcast@gmail.com. We're always looking for great guests to come on the podcast. If you have any feedback for us, let us know here at Dad Space. Looking forward to connecting with you on the next episode, right here of Dad Space. Follow us on your podcast app for more. Cheers. To you, Dad. Thank you.